Right, we'll come back to your views of what we see with the Prime Minister, but let's get some informed comment now from one of her ministers. James Heappey is Armed Forces and Veterans Minister and joins me now. Given that the Prime Minister had that disastrous press conference on Friday, she didn't seem to want to communicate yesterday in the House of Commons, spending 22 minutes and allowing Penny Mordaunt and her Chancellor to do the business. What's the point of Liz Truss, Minister? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. She is the leader of our party and the Prime Minister of our country. And I think that, she has been very clear that a mistake was made. She went too far and too fast with the mini budget, which she has owned and apologised for. But there's lots more to governing our country than that one issue. And I think that over her time as Secretary of State for International Trade and as our Foreign Secretary, she has shown that at the top table of British politics and the top table of international politics, she makes good decisions. Clearly, that's not the case in what happened 3 or 4 weeks ago. But more generally, Nick, she is a great politician. I think she has shown leadership in owning her mistake and changing the team.
Right.
And we must all now row in behind her and get on with governing for the country.
Minister, you are a military bloke. When the flak starts flying, where should the leader be?
Well, where the leader
Answer
needs
the question, if you would, sir.
Yeah, I will. The leader needs to be where the leader needs to be. I mean, there is...
What the hell does that mean?
Well, you asked me because when you are
all
at
right,
Sandhurst,
when you were leading a bunch of blokes, I would imagine you led from the front, didn't you, Minister?
Well, it depends where you need to be. So, if you want to make the military analogy, actually, what the instructors down at the infantry battle school at Brecon will be screaming at you is that sometimes the last place you want to be is right at the front, because winning a posthumous VC whilst your platoon is slaughtered ain't always the best thing. Now, that's the analogy you sought to make. It's not one that I would go for.
So when you were a major, if you had your blokes under fire, you wouldn't have stood in front of them.
Well, I would have been where I needed to. My job as an army officer, and we are going off.
You'd have been with the troops, Minister, and she should have been as well, shouldn't she?
You've got to let me answer your question, please.
Go ahead.
Your job, and this is a real tangent to be going down. I'm not sure the parallel between life and death tactical decisions on the battlefield and political decisions made in slightly slower time is accurate. But a good commander positions themselves on the battlefield in the place from which they can have the best situational awareness and make the best decisions in order to ensure the victory of their platoon or their company or whatever else. It is not about the symbolism of being the front man through the door, because actually that might not be the best place from which you can see the whole battle picture to make the right decisions, since you asked.
I'm grateful for that. You talk about Liz Truss being at the top table and making good decisions. What seems left of her mini budget then is that we have bankers getting their bonuses increased and energy bills going up next April by 75% to £4,400. That's all that's left, isn't it?
Well, hang on. What that ignores is the intervention this winter that means that for the average household, bills that could have been £6,000 or now only be £2,500
for 6 months.
Yeah, well, for the winter, which is when energy usage is at its highest and for which the public will have had the greatest concern. And that's not to say that the intervention stops in April altogether. The Chancellor was absolutely clear that in his view, the blanket cap per kilowatt hour for 2 years was too undefined as an intervention. So he's left it in place for this year, which consumers will be relieved about, with a commitment that the Treasury will look at what is a fairer and more stable intervention going forwards thereafter. It's also worth noting, Nick, that there's every reason to think that energy bills might be lower next year, not least because it will be the summer and consumption comes down. And by the time we get into next winter, who knows where we will be in Ukraine or how successfully we will have diversified our energy supplies.
All right. Minister, I mean, you have to accept that it was a U-turn by going from 2 years to 6 months. She's performed so many U-turns. Isn't there one just left for Liz Truss? Going back to be a Lib Dem? That's what you must hope for.
not sure that that's remotely.
That's the final U-turn, isn't it, Minister?
No, I don't think. Nick, I think that there is no doubting at all that the mini budget went too far, too fast. She's owned that. She's apologised for it, and she's accepted that that had an impact on the UK economy. But I also think that the bit that is missing from all of this is that there is right now a global economic situation that is causing major economies in Europe. The IMF has said overnight to be going into recession. Bloomberg have said overnight that it's now almost certain that the US will go into recession. The reason that inflation is rising is because of supply chain issues following the pandemic. The reason that interest rates are rising globally, so mortgage rates everywhere in the world are going up, is because inflation needs to be brought under control. So of course, there has been some U-turns around the mini budget, but let's not pretend that the mini budget is the sole cause of everything that is going on right now.
If it is a global problem, how come the announcements by your colleague Mr. Hunt yesterday saw the pound rise? If it was a global problem, it would have had no effect.
Well, because the markets reflect two things. They reflect a global dynamic and they reflect a confidence in the UK government. So the reassurance that the market has that, and this is quite technical, and I think that you and I have probably been on a bit of journey together over the last few weeks in learning about the gilt market and pension funds and everything else. But I suspect that the strengthening of the pound yesterday is that by giving the gilts markets confidence, and thus meaning that this LDI thing that's been going on in our pension funds, which is based on the value of gilts and was causing a bit of collapse in confidence in the sustainability of some of our pension funds, which would have had a profound impact on our economy. The fact that the market is reassured means that the pound can strengthen because it doesn't look like that issue with the pension funds is going to come to a head yet. In my sort of very Econ 101 understanding of things.
All right. Talking about economics, does the government still support the 3% lift of GDP on defence spending by 2030?
Yes.
And Mr. Watt, your colleague, the Secretary of State, says he would quit if that were changed. Would you join him?
Yeah.
You would quit?
Yeah, I mean, but no one said, Nick, that 3% is not going to happen by 2030.
So, yeah, but you would quit if there was any alteration on that in this next budget?
Yeah, we need to be spending 3% of GDP on the defence of our nation by 2030, because there is no prosperity without security. Let's be clear on that. And I don't think that that is an argument that needs to be made or won around government. I think everybody understands that we are living in a world that is more unstable, more insecure, and that if we want our nation to prosper, we have to invest in the tools to keep our nation safe. Everybody understands that.
In a related question, can I get a response from you on a story in the papers today? Hopefully you've had sight of former British fighter pilots are training the Chinese to potentially shoot down Western aircraft. Up to 30 pilots have moved to China after getting £250,000 a year contracts to teach Western flying procedures. How concerned are you? Indeed, how concerned should we all be about that story? Minister?
So I've been aware of it for a number of years, and our counterintelligence team from Defence Intelligence have been working on it to speak to those involved and to be very clear with them that what they're doing is not something that we support, and we would prefer they weren't. What they were doing was not illegal, unless, of course, they explicitly compromised secrets that they were told under that are under the Official Secrets Act, and there's no evidence that they have. But nonetheless, we are going to strengthen the law through the National Security Bill in order to make sure that when people are told that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, it becomes an offence if they then continue to do it.
Are they being anti-British?
Well, I think that a lot of them probably have entered into these arrangements in good faith. Some of them unwittingly is what we've heard back, that they weren't clear. The company involved does not say the PLA Air Force Training Academy. It's named something slightly more euphemistic. So I think when we've told them of what we believe the consequences of their actions to be, most have been concerned to reassure that they are not betraying secrets. But look, Nick, we don't want our pilots, and crucially those who are familiar with some of our most sensitive capabilities, to be working for a foreign power that we consider to be a competitor, and in some cases, a competitor that is acting in a malign way to challenge the UK interests. We would prefer they weren't doing that, and we're going to strengthen the law to make sure they can't.
Last minute or so together, Minister. People looking on at the Conservative Party, you can get rid of a Prime Minister for having a glass of Prosecco, but not for it to have thought dizzying incompetence. Why might that be?
Well, Nick, I just don't accept that as a characterisation of what's happened. It's a neat question, but I think that we have rewind 8 weeks when I was doing an interview like this, and the challenge was, where's the government? The leadership election's going on too long. There are decisions that need to be made. Over the last 3 weeks, we have seen that the cost to our economy of political instability is pretty significant. The markets react to what Westminster is doing.
That was self-inflicted, Minister.
I agree, but I can't see how you put all of that together and conclude that the answer is even more political instability. Because the idea that there is a consensus candidate somewhere that just emerges and all of the rancor and the division of the last couple of years disappears is clearly not the case. Okay. We have a leader, we have a Prime Minister, one that was elected through a process that everybody agreed with. What we all need to do now is row in behind her and get on with delivering for our country, and then let the electorate judge us when the election comes.
Lastly, later this month, the clocks will go back. If you could turn back time, we need Rishi Sunak, really, didn't we?
No. I mean, look, Nick, I honestly think that we had an exhaustive leadership election.
I concur with that.
In which the debates were had, the arguments were made, and the electorate, the membership of the Conservative Party, made a decision. Now, every single one of us, when we join our party, when we stand as a member of Parliament, we understand the rules of our leadership contests. The leadership contest has delivered us a leader who, by her own admission, made a mistake for which she has apologized. But that is not the only thing she was elected to do. And what we must do now is get on as governing as a party, united, so that the British public can have confidence that their government is concerned for them, not for our own infighting. And that must be what we do now.
Grateful for your time this morning, Minister. Thank you very much. James Heappey, Armed Forces and Veterans Minister, appearing here on LBC. We're at 2 minutes after 8 news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, after she was forced to abandon